Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you again. I very much enjoyed last time, and um, I love cross-pollinating with sister organizations here. All of you know I'm Reverend Char Bear. I'm with Circle Sanctuary, and I identify and have for decades with ecofeminist Wicca and with Celtic animism, primarily as my indigenous spiritual past. So, um, thank you, Andrea, for inviting me back. And I just got a question for everybody because when we thought about what I would talk about or share with you today, I wasn't sure if the format was like I talk for a while and present, and then we crosstalk, or if we're going to have a discussion and I've got some points to deliver along the way. So, can someone help me understand what format you're preferring here?
I always like to leave as much to the speaker as possible, but the
Got it.
constraints that we have is I really want to make sure we're done by 5:30, in
Yep.
honor of everybody's time. But if you like to do it in a specific way, we can do it either way.
Well, this is what I got. Andrew and I thought it might be timely for me to talk a little bit about post COP 28. Now, what are some of the most constructive things we all can be doing in terms of the people's climate movement or climate justice? Does that sound? I
That
just want to
sounds
read.
perfect. I
And I
think
want
that
to.
a lot of people here are very interested, given the state of things, to hear thoughts on that.
And my disclaimer is I am not an expert on COP. I am a citizen like everybody else, and I'm a faith leader. I'm a healthcare chaplain, a veteran, that sort of thing. But being a climate reality leader, definitely getting pointed to really good information and resources. So I've been gleaning some of that and putting it together. And if you like, I can kind of just walk through all that. Is there anybody else? And I recognize some names. Lovely to see you. Anybody else here who is knowledgeable, really knowledgeable about all this stuff already? Or is some of this kind of like it's been background noise, but we haven't really gotten into it yet? Help me know if you're someone who really knows about this.
Well, let's put it this way. If you consider yourself really up to date on this stuff, either raise your physical hand or your virtual hand. That will give us a sense for
Thank you.
everything. If you're like me, you can be like this. I'm
Yeah.
like a tiny bit aware.
Okay. So um, I'm not seeing raised hands, and so if you will forgive me, I will just start to go in, kind of a little bit of overview and drill down a little bit if that sounds good, because I also just kind of want to leave you with some recommendations that have come out of the Parliament of the World Religions that convened in Chicago in 2023, where over 210 faith communities from 95 countries came together and united in a call to conscience, a call to action. And the pagan community was well represented there, I got to say.
Some of us were there. Some of the people here
Yes,
were there. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Some of you delegate. And so you know of what I speak. And then we went into the COP season. And of course, Green Faith has been doing an awful lot internationally as a multi-faith, multi-generational international movement now to really speak truth to power and call out banks and big financing of the climate crisis. And so, um, uh, yeah, but COP 28, you've heard about it. COP basically is, a conference of the parties. And so the United Nations every year for a lot of years has had a climate conference. The 2023 United Nations Climate Change Conference, the Conference of the Parties, it was known as COP 28 because it was the 28th. And it was held from November 30th to December 13th. And it was at Expo City, Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. And the COP conference has been held annually 28 times since the very first UN climate agreement was made in 1992. And the event is intended for governments to agree on policies to limit global temperature rises, to adapt to impacts as a result of human made climate change. So, the conference this year was fraught with difficulties, very contentious, very controversial. It had to be extended following Saudi objections to the final agreement. The deal that was finally struck, and everyone's been going, wow, it was an historic deal. First time ever people said fossil fuels are the culprit. But man, it took a lot of heavy lifting to get everybody to state that the word fossil fuels. And we can see why. The deal finally committed all signatory countries to move away from fossil fuels. That is the first time that's happened. But it said in an orderly and equitable manner to mitigate the worst effects of climate change and to reach net zero by 2050. Already the problem here, USA was a signatory country. Thank you for the question. With, pulling eye teeth. But the problem with 2050 already is that that's 20 years later than what climate scientists are telling us. They say we need to be making a rapid shift away from our addiction to fossil fuels and mobilizing massive international effort to do this within the next decade. So 2030 is really a threshold year. And to move carefully, slowly, mitigating the worst effects and moving along to 2050 is already problematic. So I'm just not going to mince words as we go here. I don't want to, downplay the accomplishment, but there's so many big buts. And the conference this year, the basic problem with the conference that you may have heard about a lot in the news, and it's a buzz all over climate scientist posts and sites, is that there was a glaring conflict of interest. And what that means is we need a different global venue at this point. Because if the UN does not insist on changing this venue, holding the conference in a petro state of Dubai presented a whole host of challenges. And the air the attendees were breathing was blanketed with smog from burning fossil fuels. Human Rights Watch on the ground, their anti-pollution advocates who were there at UAE faced unlawful surveillance, arrest, detention, ill treatment. There was a harsh crackdown on any peaceful protesting. The president, Sultan Al-Jaber, was controversial, as well as the country itself, because it's known as a major oil producer of fossil fuels and methane oil. Al-Jaber is the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, and that has been leading to concerns over this conflict of interest. There were many claims, and yes, Mark is saying Dubai itself is a conflict of interest when it comes to the environment. Quite right. But there was covert access. The Emirate corporations who were attending had covert access to conference emails. The integrity of the conference was completely compromised, because what happens is delegates from all these countries and interests come together and they vote on all these provisions, pushing countries to become signatories. And when you've got less than 300 indigenous and frontline community leaders, including spiritual leaders who are involved as delegates, and over 3,000 fossil fuel representatives involved as delegates, you have a conflict of interest beginning of the conference. There was the problem too is that the president Al-Jaber kind of stepped out at the beginning of the conference saying, and jaws dropped across the room, that there was no scientific credibility behind fossil fuel phase out in achieving 1.5 Celsius. And then there were reports of leaked documents that appeared to show the UAE planned to use the conference to strike new fossil fuel deals with other nations. So, I mean, you see the environment there. What has started 28 times before as a United Nations conference last year and this year has become increasingly overrun by fossil fuel lobbying and interest. So the New York Times basically said at COP28 this year, it called it Big Oil versus Science, with the host country firmly on the side of the former. And the question now is, will next year be any better for the UN using this venue? But thanks to Russia vetoing the conference being held in any country that opposed its invasion to Ukraine, it is likely that Azerbaijan will be chosen to host next year's COP29 gathering, and that would make it the third big oil and gas producer in a row to host the conference. So I think we can all do a collective to that one. What this means to a lot of us watching is we cannot, to coin Greta Thunberg, we cannot wait. We as citizens, we as stewards of the earth, we as lovers of the earth, we who are trying to hold the moral compass here, we cannot wait for the UN or for individual governments to move fast enough on this. 2024 is a year when we need to be brave and we need to be loud, and we need to let people know this is not the direction we want to go in. This does not represent us. One of the climate scientists I love is Katharine Hayhoe. I'm sure some of you know of her. She's a widely respected atmospheric scientist and climate activist, and you can learn more about her. I'm going to copy this here. She has a free newsletter, Katharine Hayhoe, climate scientist, at www.katherinehayhoe.com. You spell her name Katherine, and her last name is Heyhoe. I'm going to go over here and stick it in the chat for a minute because I encourage everybody to just sign on to her newsletter for free, and you can get the skinny from her. There you go. Okay. So she, for example, in her newsletter, she was reporting, and I love this, she was saying, and I'm quoting her, one of the dodgy pieces of language circulating around the drafts of what became the final agreement at COP28 was this term unabated fossil fuels. Unabated. We even heard John Kerry using that. It's like unabated, she says, is a weasel word. It allows fossil fuel producers to weasel out of reductions by promising to capture their carbon at some time in the future. And she said, what we found as scientists is when they get to that time, they most likely will claim it was too expensive or too hard to do what they promised. So they're weaseling out. And this was a huge fight at COP, getting the language to state very clearly that we must phase out fossil fuels now. Carbon capture has been proven to be a ruse. It does not suck out of the atmosphere enough carbon fast enough or in large enough quantities to make enough of a difference in the next decade of time that we have. But it is a way to allow fossil fuel polluters to keep expanding their operations and pollution, but sounding like they're doing something good when they're not. So a real example of this very contentious drama that went on. And I love the activists who were there and the delegates from the island, the indigenous delegates from the island nations. Oh, goddess love them. Pele strong, man. They were going on during COP28 when OPEC Secretary General, I can't say this, Haytham Al-Jai, I'm so sorry to butcher your name, he wrote a letter urging members to refuse language on phasing out fossil fuels, writing, quote, "It seems that the undue and disproportionate pressure against fossil fuels may reach a tipping point with irreversible consequences," unquote. And on Saturday, Russia and Saudi Arabia, two major OPEC members, insisted the language focus on reducing climate pollution and not on fossil fuel use. So this was the kind of battling going on. And in response to that maneuver, the 1,400 scientific businesses, finance, indigenous youth, and faith leaders who signed the letter to the COP28 president at that time, calling for a rapid response to the stock take. Later is too late, they said, urging him to ensure fossil fuel phase out trajectories are put in place now. So this is the kind of stuff that goes on, COP. One thing that was cool at COP28 is there is now a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty initiative. Fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty initiative. It's a civil society campaign to create a treaty to stop fossil fuel exploration and expansion and to phase out existing production in line with the Paris Climate Agreement targets from 2015. And it supports also climate justice through a just transition to renewable energy. And this treaty has been endorsed by the Vatican, by the World Health Organization, by the European Parliament, by Nobel laureates, Al Gore, academics, researchers, activists, and a growing list of governments are jumping behind it. And so the program includes the creation of a standalone global registry of fossil fuels to ensure transparency, accountability. That seems to be the order of the day. And accountability about production and reserves. And if you want to know more about this, I'm going to put this link as well into the chat because it's a great way to stay informed about the progress of this treaty. And here you go. It's the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, fossilfueltreaty.org. One of my mentors, as I mentioned the last time I was on, I'm a trained climate reality leader. So former Vice President, Nobel laureate Al Gore, he said that the climate crisis is a moral and spiritual crisis. He was at COP28. And he was presenting about this really groovy new thing. It's based on new geospatial technology, and it's called Climate Trace. If you've heard of it, you can now use satellite imaging to see real evidence of what fossil fuel pollution is happening, where and how much, making it now impossible for fossil fuel big polluters to evade accountability with their gaslighting and their greenwashing. So this is a really exciting new technology, and you can learn more about this at climatetrace.org. I'm going to give this to you. One of the reasons I'm giving you these kind of scientific-y links is that a lot of us in faith communities want to do advocacy, but because we're not climate scientists necessarily, we have a hard time getting access to information. And these are really well-vetted resources that you can use to help you sort of really beef up your knowledge about climate reality right now, the state of things, and the technologies and the accountability underway. So Climate Trace has in its inventory, if you go on that site, it includes every country, every territory in the world, every major sector of the global economy, nearly every major source of greenhouse gas emissions. So, Gore was doing that and also advocating and supporting. And kind of a summary of COP28 to wrap this part up was, as we turn the corner into 2024, as I said, people realizing we're going to need to be brave. I mean, really outspoken and bold out there. Because in terms of moral compass, some of the institutions were really trusting to look out for public safety, to protect the public against risk, let alone any particular belief system. They're failing us. And COP28, despite its shortcomings, which I pointed out, it did mark a major step forward for the people's climate movement insofar as for the first time ever, a COP agreement has it on the books in print, explicitly acknowledging the main culprit responsible for the climate crisis, this massive existential mess we're in, is fossil fuels and our addiction to it. And it didn't go so far as to say we have the solutions we need to overcome it now, and that we can, because no one was ready to go there with those hosts in play. That is the truth. And while the agreement falls short on a complete phase out of fossil fuels, it does urge countries to transition away from them. It calls for a tripling of renewables, a doubling of energy efficiency this decade. It lacks binding commitments, though. It has loopholes for fossil fuel, doesn't go far enough. But there were almost 130 countries supporting the fossil fuel phase out. And again, goddess love them, the island countries almost had an open revolt because they are facing massive sea level rise, hurricanes, typhoons, and they're some of the least polluting nations on the earth. So another link here, if you need an overview summary to share with anybody or just to look at, you don't have to listen to me. It's from the Climate Reality Project. It's in the chat here, and it shows Al Gore giving a YouTube or just a brief, less than 5 minute sort of wrap up, if that's helpful to you. All right. So realistically, where we stood at the end of 2023, it was the warmest year since human record keeping began, with the average temperature at 1.48 Celsius above pre-industrial levels, meaning it is the warmest year on record by a lot. July was the hottest month ever recorded. Thousands of high temperature records were shattered around the globe all the way through December. And more than 3/4 of the temperature increase is caused by burning fossil fuels. So, of course, that's being phased out, right? Oil and gas production in the United States hit an all-time high last year, despite historical climate policy that went into effect, some of which I'm taking advantage of by electrifying my home and transportation. And while the world's heating, lest we be confused, I always say follow the money, because we all know the need to, when you think about warding and binding, the 5 super major oil companies, BP, British Petroleum, Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Total Energies, they are set to pay their shareholders record dividends of more than $100 billion for 2023, which will top 2022's record of 104 billion. And that's what people are straining to pay for gas at the pump. Okay. So, I mean, for me, when people are out there trying to make this a political issue, the politics is around who's banking off of this. Where's the money? Where's the power? But the climate crisis should never be a partisan political crisis, right? This is an existential global issue. It's an ecological crisis. It's a moral crisis. It's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against life on the planet, and it's to my mind, it's just pathological. It's insane. It's insane. So it kind of leads us to the question of, so what do we do now, right? And I want to leave time for us to talk about that. But with your indulgence, there are some things here that have been pretty broadly suggested just out of the 2024 gate. Should I share them?
Yes, please.
I know. Let's get to that part. But hopefully that was a helpful overview of COP, because it does share with you a lot of the lobbying kind of financial and political dynamics that go on around this. And what I come away with from all of that is just more massive effort. I mean, it feels like fossil fuel interests, and I've named some of the large players. It's almost like a really bad drunk, who just will not give up and is going to go down and take everyone going down with him. Or as somebody said, I think it was, I forget who said, it's like they're just putting the pedal to the floorboard, racing toward that cliff, even though they see it. And it's like, it's crazy. It's crazy. So how are we going to stop that? Well, some good news. Thank you, Catherine Hayhoe. She always has in her newsletter good news and not so good news. So you get a good balance with her. That's why I recommend her as a source. A recent EPA report did say that climate solutions are already making a real difference. So this is the story that people need to hear a lot. Is that when we love our air element and our solar energy, and we put them to use, and we ally with them and we work with them, they help us. They help everything on this planet. And the climate solutions are already making a difference. For example, in the US, all of the EVs and hybrid autos already on the road have measurably reduced US carbon emissions from vehicles. I'm someone who's, I'm a chaplain. I'm a basic American. I'm not rich, and I'm using an instant rebate of $7,500 $1,000 on a qualifying bolt that I got with the trade-in and that. I mean, it made it affordable for me to get into it. Used ones have 4,000. It's helping people to get into an EV. Solar is now the cheapest form of electricity in most countries around the world. We installed it on our house last year, nothing down, financing with the tax credit coming back. We're going to keep our energy bills low, low, low with that. So, and even if and when someday we sell the house, if there's anything left over in the balance, to be rolled over into the mortgage for a fraction.
I'd
And people,
love to have Maka has a question, so let's get that in because we got 4 minutes. So Maka, why don't you go ahead
sorry,
and ask?
Maka.
It's not really a question. I wanted to add something that is in terms of seeing a difference. The California emission standards that were put into place some years ago have turned Los Angeles County, that bowl of smog, around, and it's not a bowl of smog anymore. Just to prove that these things work. It costs a little more for the gas, big deal, and we shouldn't be having the gas anyway. It's true, but that's a really strong, to me, very pronounced example of this kind of
Absolutely.
and the other thing I want to real quick is that working from the bottom up, from the personal. I belong to this group called Interfaith Climate Action, and the first thing we did was get all the churches and synagogues to go deep green.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I
just little
absolutely-
things like that, and disinvest from fossil fuel. There are things that you can touch. You have an effect. I mean, you can't see it from a satellite, but it's a little bit at a time that people can feel they make a difference and see a difference after a bit. So
Yeah, I
also,
think
all of us know. Sorry, all of us know that it's usually easier to affect local change. So that's just another thing I want to throw out there.
right, but it's
Back to you.
also when you're getting really discouraged.
well, we're coming up in an election year. There's going to be all kinds of opportunity for acting globally, thinking and acting locally and globally. But one of the biggest things I really want to encourage everybody to do, and I'm taking stock of how much I'm willing and able to do this, is really being a champion for truth, getting the right information, combating misinformation. It is time we stop being nice to people who are killing the planet, to people who want to destroy our democracy and kill our planet. It is not time to be nice. And so really understanding what the gaslighting is, what the greenwashing is, calling it out. That's the prophetic, speaking truth to power need right now. And of course, voting for climate politicians and climate policy. There's a Climate Action Now app that's really quite amazing. I've put the link in there in the chat. I'm going to do it for you. And it was started by people. It's a separate platform. You are not giving away your personal information. They're friends of mine who started it, and it's a game changer when it comes to legislative climate action. We learned a lot about that during the pandemic. This is one of the ways we can utilize that lesson. So I want to leave some time here for other people to talk.
Well, unfortunately, we just have
or
one
question.
So because we only have 1 minute, the one thing I want to add to people is the course, in addition to these apps, Citizen Climate Lobby itself has really great tools. I mean, they make it so easy to lobby. I mean,
absolutely.
You don't have to know what to say. I really encourage, if people are not, we love people to come here, whether you're active with Citizen Climate Lobby or not, because we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to remind people that those tools really do make it. And Citizen Climate Lobby has done a great job of making real change. So these are all things that heterodyne well together. And with that, thank you so much. It's 5:30, and I want to thank everybody.
Was she going to put on a link for this app?
Yes, please send the link in.
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
And I am a member of Citizen Climate Lobby as well, and Climate Reality, and we love to see pagans there, turning out, showing up, and being bold about it. So thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can someone send me a link to the app, because it's not appearing in my chat?
It's for some reason that I don't see it in the chat. Can you put it again?
I see the text for the app. So Andrea, we can locate the URL for it.
Alex will send it to me. I will.
It's very easy. Yeah,
okay, thank you.
Just put it in there. You got it. You'll love it. Okay.
It's great app.
Bye, y'all.
Okay,
Thanks,
see you
everyone.
next. Hopefully see everybody next.
Okay, power on.